Let's take a call. You're calling from an 845 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 845.
Hey,
Right.
Michael. This is Michelangelo. I'm from Newburgh, New York.
Hey, Michael. How you doing? Michelangelo, how are you doing, man? What's on your mind?
I'm scared shitless, Michael. I'll be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
This IPCC report that came out this morning.
Yeah, we're gonna get to
I'm
it.
someone who I'd like to think follows, climate action, environmental science, ecology, declining global biomass, and to be honest with you, it's getting pretty scary.
Yep.
I don't think people realize what's coming, it's pretty terrifying. There's a real change coming, a reckoning. Feels like mankind is kind of sleepwalking into the apocalypse.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, yes,
CNN
you
gave
are
this
correct.
2.5 minutes. CNN gave this story 2.5 minutes, and it was done through a weather report.
It was done through a weather report. Okay, I think it's interesting. I guess I guess in a certain sense, it is the weather. I mean, the only thing I'd say about this, I think that there's always the tension, particularly when you talk about something like climate, of what in social science they used to have this terminology. I don't know if it's still current in the field, but I remember, in college studying commons crises like 10, 12 years ago. And they would talk about basically crisis messages versus empowerment messages. And what they meant was they would do these simulations where there were these digital fish in a digital pond, and people would have a certain amount of fishing they could do or couldn't do, but it wasn't governed. It was all sort of left to personal discretion. Now, but I'll get to the second point in a minute. But basically what they would do is they would send messages to the group, either being like, we're running out of fish. This is being completely, people are reckless in their consumption. It needs to stop, or we're going to hit a wall and everybody's not going to have any fish anymore. The behavior was that they actually increased their rate, because their perception was, this is done anyways. I'm going to get mine. The other hand was obviously when they said, don't worry about it. Of course, it didn't affect people's behavior, but the messages that were like, this is dangerous, this is bad, but something can be done, as I recall, did have the most positive effect. Now, the problem with studies like that is that obviously something like climate change is not down to our personal behavior. I'm not saying that people shouldn't, make decisions to lower their carbon footprint and so on and so forth. That's very nice and is going to be a little bit of the, piece of the puzzle here. But obviously in a macro sense, it's about policy, and fundamentally, it's about, in my view, not just capitalism. It's about capitalism. It's about industrialization. It's about rates of consumption.
Yep.
And it is also about technological innovation, because that is going to have to be a piece of the puzzle here, because the rate of the crisis we're in, and the fact that
accelerating.
Yeah, it's accelerating, and also demand for all sorts of goods is accelerating as well. And so we are going to have to think about, how do you green supply chains, and how do you get more efficient vehicle fleets on the road? That's part of it. But, the
report itself even stipulates that, we're going to have to extract carbon out of the atmosphere at this point as a mandatory, policy proposal to address the issue globally.
Right.
It's not even enough to just reverse and limit carbon emissions, but we now have to extract as well as part of the solution, which is just incredible.
Yep.
And I saw something today or yesterday as well, centered around Germany and their energy policy, that they actually, and I think Greenpeace was part of this, that they're facing a plateau of sorts because they were forced to shut down some of their nuclear power, and they don't have enough solar and wind to be able to sustain the their electric grid. And now they've kind of been forced to go back to coal and oil because nuclear is not seen as a positive, but maybe a necessity as part of this transition, just to limit
phased out
emissions.
nuclear. I'm extremely skeptical for obvious reasons of nuclear power. But I mean, I don't.
Oh, absolutely.
But
Has my
I hear what you're saying about. I mean, maybe that's not something to be dogmatic about. Although when you look at what even just storing it means from a basic safety perspective, the implications of it are horrifying and potentially like mass scale catastrophic in terms of like, hundreds of millions of deaths. So I'm very wary of it. And obviously I think part of what happened in Germany was that the phase out had started under the Schroeder-Fischer government of 98 to 2005, which is when, to that government's credit, they were absolutely in a third way tradition, but they certainly accelerated solar, wind, and they made a lot of improvements and upgrades to the energy infrastructure of Germany, and they did green policies to some extent, to some significant extent. They were also phasing out nuclear, and Merkel stopped the process, if I recall, and then restarted it after what happened in Japan in 2011. So, yeah, I don't know the answer on that one. I'm extremely wary of it.
One last note.
Yeah, go ahead.
That I feel something that is worth talking about as well, given what's happening in Brazil, is that the global rise of fascism in the far right now is going to be antithetical to any real attempt at reversing our current trajectory, because the nationalism present within that ideology is going to be very limiting when we need to kind of coalesce as a global people to address the issue.
Well, yeah, because it's three. I mean, the one component is the bigotry and the nationalism, the xenophobia and the division, and the formalization of, just the eliminationist perspective on most people's lives, frankly. That's combined with the fact that, when really given the choice, and in Brazil, the international financial press to some extent, like The Economist, actually put out a serious anti-Bolsonaro editorial, but national, money and industry is lining up behind the fascists. So money breaks fascist, even if they don't think it's polite. And then the third component, which I'll emphasize, I think is definitely the least important. It is a byproduct, not a foundation. But there is a religious fanatic component of it. And when you start to look at whether it's Saudi Arabia or Brazil or the United States, that fusion of, well, maybe there are a lot of lives that will be lost, but as long as they're the right lives, people of color, so on, we can set up a gated community system. We can increase violence, which is what Bolsonaro campaigned on specifically, empowering police and paramilitaries to kill more people in favelas. The military dictatorship in Brazil didn't kill enough people, according to Bolsonaro. So, and then if you fuse that together with the corporate interests and a very a primitive, in a proper use of that word, expression of religion, I mean, yeah, that's a toxic cocktail. That's actually the cocktail that, with the destruction of the left in the Middle East, that's one of the reasons the Middle East has so many problems. I mean, really, it's like if you kind of have unbridled feudalistic capitalism and the only kind of public outlet that's available is a very narrow type of religion. There's no civil society, there's no labor unions, there isn't sort of vectors for that expression. And in some places, it's a more privileged experience than others, right? If you live in the Emirates or something and you're a citizen, you can have an incredibly nice lifestyle. Not a sustainable one, but a very nice lifestyle. And, but that's built on all sorts of exploitative feudal labor practices. So, yeah. I'm not cheering you up. Yeah. Thanks, man. I'm sorry. I don't have anything better to say. I'm sorry. All right. Thanks, man. All right. Let's get to this. This is a sound of Petteri Talas. I apologize in advance. He is Secretary General of what, though? He's not the Secretary General of the UN. That's Gutierrez. He's the Secretary General of the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, and he's presenting the conclusions of a new climate report at the UN. This is where we're at.
Climate change is already visible, and it's having impacts on human beings, ecosystems all around the world, and we can still limit the warming to 1.5 degrees, but we should change many things how we run our everyday business today. And one of the major issues is that there will be 420 million people less suffering because of climate change if we would be able to limit the warming to 1.5 degree level. And we have certain areas in the world which are extremely sensitive. It's the small island states, Mediterranean region, and also sub-Saharan Africa, which are already suffering and will suffer the most in the future. With 2 degrees, we would have ice-free summer in the Arctic every year, and once per decade, but with 1.5 we would see it only once per 100 years.
So that's the science, and that's the reality, give or take some variables that I'm sure are going to be, adjusted. We might even be in a worse shape than he's saying.
That's the thing
right?
about the Bret Stephens column. Like, who knows? They could be wrong. They could be wrong in either direction.
They could be wrong in either direction, and the likelihood of your less than 1% contrarian fantasy that this is this is no problem, and there'll just be more prime beachfront real estate opening up in more places that like mangoes grow in your fantasy world, which has very little relationship to any established science on this, versus they could be soft pedaling how dangerous this is, it could break either way, and one way it could break fits with reality, and the other way it could break is just contrarian, nonsensical musings of a Bret Stephens. Now, the only other thread I think to add to this, besides that this is incredibly dangerous and incredibly serious, and that global ecology collapse, the global ecological crisis, as expressed through climate change, as expressed through rapid elimination of various species and plant life and biodiversity, should be, if not absolutely one of the organizing principles upon which we do politics globally, but really think about how we're designing our lives, from our food to our transportation system to even our sense of relationship to the world around us. I mean, some of this actually does get into some very genuinely existential questions about human experience. The other sort of dividing line is if you were to say that there were 3 poles of this right now, there is the fact that we are in profound, deep crisis, the fact that whether it's Donald Trump or Bolsonaro, or obviously all of the Republican Party, or most emergent fascist regimes are not serious. In fact, they might even be going in the other direction in terms of dealing with climate. Certainly in Trump's case, he is. Modi, it's a bit more complicated. He's actually rapidly deployed some sustainable energy technologies in India, but still nothing to overwhelm India's carbon footprint. So we have that one pole. Then we have, say, Jerry Brown exemplifying a technocratic, long-range approach to climate, which is obviously, again, in a world of relative choices, it's way better than Trump. It's way better that you have a governor of California forcing efficiency upgrades, having a different car fleet, having different energy standards. But at the same time, as Joshua Kahn, who's an associate of mine and a global climate activist, there's no justice in that Jerry Brown vision. That's why the issues of environmental racism in California have not been addressed at the same time as all of this rapid action on climate change. That's why there's still fracking permits being given, which disproportionately not only is bad for the environment, but disproportionately affects certain more vulnerable communities. So if you don't have a justice dimension and you don't have a dimension that deals with capital, you will have a fight between eliminationist fascists whose policy, the Trump administration recently, the EPA, I believe, put out a document banking on a 7-degree increase in temperature in 100 years from now. That is a built-in assumption of a radically scarred, dangerous, death-filled world. But I could also imagine that a lot of people see a lot of opportunity for gated communities, for private militias, for, all sorts of business opportunities for the Blackwaters or whatever, or Z or whatever the hell it's called of the world, to monitor, police, to terrorize populations like environmental refugees. And we already see that. You can't reduce what's happened to Syria to one variable at all, but there is a climate dimension to what happened in Syria. And so the same, outbreak of xenophobia and racism targeted towards people of the Middle East going into Europe has a direct climate dimension. So there's fascist versus technocrat, and then there's also the justice dimension of actually dealing with ecology in a way that integrates with broad human concern. And we don't have much time. And obviously, and again, I'll emphasize again, in the relative world, the Jerry Brown versus Donald Trump, that's the type of thing where you go out and you do an intelligent vote and you don't have a fantasy life and you actually make a concrete decision to choose one option that's better than the other. But structurally and fundamentally, that choice is still going to leave. It's not just going to leave tens of millions of people behind and harm tens of millions of people. It won't get the job done structurally. What's this tweet, man?
So it's just a tweet I saw on Twitter. Is it Gal Galach? I gotta laugh when people say especially rich countries aren't doing anything in the face of climate change. It simply isn't true. They've been busy fortifying themselves against the very victims of climate change that they created at the expense of their own development. And it's interesting, and it's the sort of thing we sort of touched on it earlier, but when we talk about expanding representation to people, it can't just be within the United States, right? Because even if we had a very healthy universal basic income, it would basically be at on the backs of like poorer nations, basically. Right. So we need to figure out a way to. I mean, it's such a huge project, right? But
it's a huge project. It is a time where there's no option but ambition. And anybody who says that they have a simple answer for any of this, I mean, I think there's simple values, there's modes of analysis that make sense, but I mean, it's enormously complicated in terms of how you actually do this. But at least you need to be real about what needs to be done. And I think you also need to be real about what your playing field is, right? Because I think there are some people who probably would say, look, if we can fortify a certain type of lifestyle and protect things in a certain way, in the same way that it's not a national scandal that Apple and our whole business is built on, let's take a micro example, illegally mined minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which have continued to fuel one of the most horrific multi-party civil wars on the planet. I mean, that attitude of indifference can just be scaled, in that second technocratic climate model.
Makes me think things like rights just to basic water and sustenance. I've thought so often over the past couple months about how, I can't remember what the stat is, but doesn't Nestle own some ridiculous, god awful amount of our fresh water supply?
I don't know the stat, but they do. And
that needs to be ended immediately.
There was a serious controversy at the United Nations in 2011 or 10 about even just a symbolic public recognition as water as a human right. It eventually was passed because the United States and France didn't veto it, but it was a present vote because of literally, concerned about even just fucking bottled water companies. So yes, 100%. And now a lot of that has to do with reclaiming an idea of commons. That is a Marxist viewpoint, and it's also, it could be an anarchist viewpoint, it could be a liberal viewpoint. There has to be some understanding that there are massive swaths of human existence, many of them ecological, and also I'd argue a lot of them technological, that were not generated by markets. And they are the product of either shared human inheritance or shared human creativity. And they're getting eliminated and privatized and profited from in a purely predatory criminal manner.
Yeah. I haven't seen the movie, but Michael Burry, who's the guy in The Big Short, has been exclusively trading in water commodities since like 2015. So
Right.
if you want to have an idea of where things are moving, like
He's the guy in the movie who sees, along with a handful of others, where the housing market is going. So he's seeing the same thing with fresh water supplies. And if you go, I mean, and again, like he says in the report, go back and read a book like Resource Wars, which came out, I think, during the Bush era. It's certainly at least 10 years old, by Michael Clare, who's a security studies professor at Hampshire College. There already was every single conflict you could look at in the world, including ones that people don't pay any attention to and don't care about and you know, have no reference for. It's small arms, which are usually coming from the United States, maybe China, that fuel the literal mechanics of the conflict. And most of the arguments have to do with gold, minerals, timber, water. That's it. I mean, it's another, I won't get into some new atheist thing, but it's like, it's another example of how in the real world, and even if you don't understand that you're operating in the real world, that most events are driven by very basic stuff. It's not about like ideas and this and that abstraction. It's who gets what, where, when, and how. And the ideas we should have are ideas and ethical commitments to people having, as Matt said, a good, just life where they can access and participate in the commons themselves and have their human needs met. And God forbid, maybe even actually have some access to, you know, realizing themselves beyond survival.